Hi, Ananya.
Hi, Saran. We'll
Is
start
the
in,
audio
yeah, it's clear.
great?
We'll start in a minute or two.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, like people join in a bit.
Mm.
Hello, everyone joining in. Welcome to the live session.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Neville.
Thanks for being here. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's begin. Hello,
Okay.
everyone. I'm Ananya Zuchi. I'm a consulting mindfulness therapist at Manushala. For those of you who don't know what Manushala is and does, let me give you a quick gist of the organization. So, Manushala is a mental health and well-being startup. We envision to democratize preventive mental health and well-being solutions in India. Today, we'll be having a conversation on the topic disasters and survivors, resilience as a journey. We have with us D. Saran Prakash, who is a member of Confederation of Risk Reduction Professionals, CRRP India, and disaster risk management professional. She's a doctoral student at the Dayalbagh Educational Institute. She holds a master's degree in disaster management from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Thank you, Saran, for being here.
Thank you, Ananya. It's an honor to be here.
It's an honor to have you. So, my first question to you is when we say survivors, who all are we referring to today as survivors?
Okay. So, see, after a hazard has passed and we begin assessing the disaster situation, I think we can identify three broad categories which face the brunt of, adverse effects of the disasters in some way or the other. So these three categories are the first one being the system of governance or the institutional structures in place, which, because no matter how well we prepare for a hazard, there is always a possibility of things going out of control depending on the intensity of the hazard and other enabling factors for a disaster. So when a disaster strikes, it has been a tendency that the governing institutions and the structures have had to deal with some unforeseen elements of shock that suddenly halt its normal functioning. So that is our first category. Then we have the rescue and relief teams or the personnel on field, because these teams are meant to reach in time when the affected population requires aid, and we can understand that these teams put themselves in a combination of known and unknown adversaries, because again, as I said, no matter how prepared we are, uh,
Right,
or how trained we are, no two hazards are same. So
right,
no two disasters can also be same. So for the basis, for these teams also, there are some standard operating procedures or SOPs formulated on the basis of learnings from the past hazards, past disasters, and these are those actions and you know those actions and the shocks to which they have to respond instantaneously, even they are there. So training is only for what actions are to be taken and how they are to be taken. But
Right.
will it also provide emotional or mental immunity from the stress or shock that they also have to deal with anyway? Because some thousands of lives are depending on them in that moment. And then comes the third category, the civilians, you, I, us, we, the people. So we should acknowledge that, there is an extremely humble percentage of people who value preparedness, or for that matter, who even know about it in the first place. And once again, for those with some amount of preparedness, when the hazard strikes, it can still rush in a very unforeseen picture. Then imagine, for the majority of people, what the level of uncertainty and sudden breakdown of everything can do. So I think, going by who is at the higher level of exposure and uncertainty, we can consider that civilians are the survivors for this
Right.
conversation.
Right.
So for an understanding, we can say that these survivors are the ones who have to deal with, the blow of losing their lives, their livelihoods, grievous injuries, or heavy monetary
Mm.
losses, and the memories of the disaster definitely not helping them anyway. So yeah.
Right. That was very informative. Um, so, what is basically resilience for these survivors?
Okay. So see, because before I answer this question,
Yeah.
sorry, I should admit that I have not had a direct interaction with any
Okay.
survivors per se, or even if I did not have a conversation from this perspective. So whatever
Right.
I share here right now would not be a claim that can be, it's not a verifiable answer, but
Right.
it will surely be something that I have gathered from the little literature that I read during my masters, which was, documented by scholars from their own experiences. So,
Right.
first thing is, how do we typically understand resilience? Resilience is, the capacity of bouncing back from difficult events. In disaster studies, we understand it as the, how do I put it, the ability of the to affected population from the hazard to bounce back despite all the downturns that came. And that is, I think, a very simplified definition, and it's not even an understanding, I would say. So I think, as a process, as a journey for survivors, resilience is it's not a point A to point B direct jump. Or if I have to explain it a little musically, it is not a direct jump from the note C major to D major. There is a C sharp major in between. These
Right.
both cannot be it cannot be denied. So it is not like today there is a disaster. I mean, there is a hazard which struck. There was damage. I repaired it in let's say a week's time, and maybe set all my furniture back at home into its place, and bang, I am resilient. Done and dusted. So that's not resilience. The impact that affects the hazard, the impact or its effects, as I said, that the hazard leaves here are, they are here. And
Right.
there will be, so it takes a lot of time for the echo of those impacts to sort of tone down. So it means there will be moments when a person might feel strong and may want to help people around, and there will be moments of setback when a person is just emotional and feeling unbearably stressful. So for some people it may mean displaying strength in front of their dear ones, and for some it may mean grieving and letting it all out. So I
Right.
think the meaning of resilience, seen from the perspective of survivors as we are talking, is not fixed as a characteristic or as a trait. It is complex. It is personal with no defined roadmap or any universal formula, and it is about inner perseverance as well as it is about the assurance of the reception of let's say external things like social support. And one more thing, frankly, for survivors, I think resilience as a term is possibly not even something. It is us in academics, in practice, that we use this term resilience so often. For them, it
Right.
is but a phase, with expressions and feelings like, let's
Right.
move on. Let's see how to repair this. And by this, I mean their situation in general. Or it could be, this is a curse. We have lost everything. There is no way out. And, so on and so forth, with different tones of gray. So for all those who have made it out alive, out of a disaster, I think resilience is a phase. It's a journey, as we are calling it, and it is the only way after a disaster several times. For some with motivation, and for some with gloom. So it is. I think it is simply the time after the hazard has passed.
Right. I mean, you did touch on the effects of resilience as well, but I would also like you to focus on a little bit on how resilience is related to and is affecting mental health in the face of a disaster.
Okay. Okay. So I think it is exerting pressure for people in different ways, spanning across the pre and post phases of a disaster. And I can right now think of two ways here. See, the first one is when, going by the definition, people are trying to flip their apparent vulnerabilities into strengths. So, for example, children, okay, because of their dependence on their parents, their elders, guardians, are considered to be one of the most vulnerable sections during a disaster. So that vulnerability itself is flipped into strength when we talk about what is called child-centered disaster risk management, or CCDRR. So,
Okay.
utilizing spaces like schools, or forming small social groups in parks where children gather to play. Elders and even sometimes experts, they, help children understand and identify the risks that surround us. Very simple yet significant acts like saving water, not wasting it, or being conscious of fire signs and danger zones which may cause accidents, or memorizing the contact numbers of emergency services like the fire department or the ambulance. Are they are all taught to them just to lessen the possibility of major harm, if not completely prevent it. So let's say in a disaster, for example, if a child is stuck in a flat where there has been a fire outbreak and there is an elder who has fallen unconscious, the first thing that the child knows to do, what to do, is call up the neighbors, cover his or her or their mouth with a damp towel, because the child knows that the smoke should not enter the lungs. Then close the door of the room where the fire has broken out, because that uh, contains it for a while until the emergency services arrive. And once they have arrived, the fire is extinguished, uh, and the building is, sort of saved from major damage. The child and the elder have made it out, and they begin to regain normalcy in their life again. So that was a pre-disaster resilience building effort. Now, in post-disaster phase, there are two ways of looking at resilience. The first one, let's say, is triple B, or bouncing back better. We
Okay.
built everything again. Let's take the same example. We build everything again. All the physical damage to the flat has been repaired, and everything is back to the way it was. And the family is gradually trying to bring back normalcy out of the bouts of fear and worry, of course, dealing with some amount of stress frequently, distress, in fact. Second way is something that I personally subscribe to, which is bouncing forward. Okay, so suppose in our example, the source of the fire outbreak was, let's say, an extension cord which got overheated. So, when the repairs are underway, instead of using the extension cords yet again, the family will get more wall sockets if required. That way, the stress caused by their fear of another outbreak is addressed to with appropriate preventive methods. So you see, one fire incident has triggered the family to be more conscious, more risk conscious, uh, more thoughtful, mindful, and cautious of their actions. And I think in this case, it is eustress, as you would call it in mental health studies, the fear of something motivating the family to improve their situation.
Yeah, right. That was again a lot of things that I think a lot of people might not have known, and it's very it's good to know this because it's not really we don't really talk about it in our everyday life. It's not
Yeah.
something that we use that often. So how will the embodiment of resilience
Uh,
change from an everyday stressful situation to say when coping with a disaster?
the answer is very simple. See, what forms the stress of our everyday life? An assignment or a report deadline to meet. For
Right.
children, it is the punishment of being late to the school, or lately the fear of not being able to log into their school if the internet's down. For an office going woman, it could be back to back meetings. Or for a father, it could be taking the needed care of his child following a fixed timetable. So basically, these points of stresses are all part of our everyday routine, our timetable. By now, we have become used to them, and used to them enough to be able to anticipate the consequences. So we try to take preventive measures beforehand with, sometimes maybe extra resources at hand and better planning. So when things begin to get, out of control or haywire, if they do, uh, we have at least one backup plan, at our disposal. So we use them and make it out of that stressful situation. And later on, we get a coffee and watch an episode of Friends, and we relax and we feel ready to face another day after a few hours. So that is our resilience and stresses in everyday life. Now, are disasters routine? Are they a regular thing? See, when China it was faced with a major outbreak of COVID-19, did we, sitting in India, anticipate that a few months from then, we will have to be dealing with a total shutdown of everything? Did we foresee the emergence of the concept of, the stress buying or panic buying when shops were shut? To
Right.
get out of that stress, did a walk in the park or in the garden help? Did we even do that? So some major lifestyle changes had to be brought in. For that matter, major livelihood changes had to be made in several cases. I recall that there was a case that one of my seniors in CRRP shared. This incident, it is based in Ahmedabad, Gujarat. So, and this was during the time when COVID was new to all of us in India, and lockdown had been imposed, and only essential items were allowed to be sold, and only those shops were open. But the old city of Ahmedabad, as they call it had shops which were into selling things like musical instruments.
Right.
So obviously these shops were also shut because they are not essential items. One such shop owner, he was not able to cope with the cash crunch. But so what he did was, because he had to survive and make his ends meet, he shifted his business to selling vegetables. Obviously, it was not easy for him because he was not used to, and It was not easy for him to adapt to the situation and adopt a new mode of earning, because he was unaware of the supply chain and other related nuances of vegetable selling. So it
Right.
took him some time to get used to that. But the thing is, not only did he manage to continue, he eventually even partnered with a battery rickshaw wala, or tuk-tuk as we even call it in Delhi, they became a part of Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation's AMC's Vegetable on Wheels initiative. So, not that it was a highly profit making venture, but he did manage to survive through the tough times. He, managed to bounce forward with something new. So, for him, that was resilience in times of disaster. So, to answer your question in one single point about how does the embodiment of embodiment, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
embodiment.
yeah,
Embodiment.
embodiment of resilience change. I would say that the change depends on one thing, the foreseeability of a situation, the anticipation of what can go wrong and how. So sometimes resilience, it is pre-planned, like in several situations in our everyday life. And sometimes resilience is instantaneous. It comes along with the flow, like what happened in the case of Ahmedabad.
Right. So, do you think there is a difference in the nature of resilience across different demographics?
I'm sorry, I could not get you. The audio, it got stuck.
Oh, I'll just repeat. Do you think
Yeah.
there is a difference in the nature of resistance across different demographics?
Okay, it's a very interesting question. It's fascinating, and it is a struggle for me to answer this, but I'll try.
Yeah,
So to
sure.
explore to explore this answer, we need to understand that the thing that we keep repeating in CRRP as well, that disasters, they are not natural. Yes, see, during our school years, we all have probably learned that there are two types, natural and man-made disasters. But the
Yeah,
thing is,
yeah.
dis- yeah, disasters do not have any types because they are always human-induced. An earthquake,
Oh,
see, and yeah, so an earthquake in itself is not a disaster. It is a hazard. It's a natural hazard. What makes it a disaster is, the complex interaction of several other factors, like the weak structure of buildings. So buildings fall and there is a loss of lives and livelihoods. Similarly, there are other enabling factors like exposure, specific vulnerabilities of different strata of people in a community, their coping capacity. So this clarifies that hazards are themselves, they are neutral to the differences that exist in a community or a society at large. But disasters, they are not neutral, meaning men, women, boys, girls, children, elderly, the LGBT and the queer community, they all face impacts differentially. They are not the same. So, first thing, when the impact is differential, how can its response and the resilience from the hazard and the disaster be similar? Also, and I, for one, personally feel that resilience is a very, it's very individual as a journey, because as we discussed, it doesn't have a roadmap. It doesn't have a universal formula. Neither are the capacities of two people same. So demographics, I think it's a rather bigger entity that we are talking about. See, we do study and research about disaster resilience, and that is how we also acknowledge that resilience of the affected community cannot be summed up. We can only get
Mm.
information and data about what kind of response has reached, how many families have been, they have received the relief, and whether rehabilitation is meeting the needs of the community. But
Right.
whether or not the community, the people have gained resilience is something that cannot be aggregated, especially when we are talking about the resilience of survivors. Because see, for institutional structures, we can identify resilience from whether or not all the functions have resumed properly. But with survivors, understanding their resilience, the nature of their resilience, the journey of their resilience is, I think it's more micro and it's personal. So,
Right.
in recent years, actually, several projects, some outreach projects and studies have come up, which, take up case studies to personally interact with survivors so that disaster management community in general can understand what affects different populations and how does it affect. We try to understand it as much as possible. So this helps us in sort of foreseeing the challenges in the implementation of disaster risk reduction or DRR efforts and localize them for inclusive and efficient results. And what to add? Yeah, so also one more very significant and crucial thing here, and something that we in CRRP also keep emphasizing repeatedly, the role
Right.
of youth in disaster resilience and resilience in general. Their
Right.
inclusion in the process, listening to their concerns, trying to chalk out ways for them and via them, happens to be not only crucial, but it is also very needed. See, because youth is, I think, that section of any population which sort of stands at the linking point of what and how existed a decade before, and what and how should something should be from now on. Their opinions, they are contemporary, they are relevant, because not only can they bring to light the concerns of their community and members, be it elders, be it children, or they themselves for that matter. But they can also offer suggestions which are updated with the modern resources and try to contextualize the solutions accordingly. Um, a very recent example that we all witnessed, the second wave of COVID-19 when it hit
Yeah.
India. Wasn't it the youth which mobilized all the technology related resources and social media platforms to help several people gain access to the needed equipment? So,
Right.
yeah, so in situation when an elderly couple, for example, must have felt disoriented, vulnerable with nobody to help get their groceries, for example, the next door young person must have used his, her, or their screen tap to do the needful so that the couple does not suffer the brunt. So the point is, definitely we cannot rule out the possibility that the nature of resilience may vary across different sections, different demographics of people, depending on their strengths, their weaknesses. And these strengths and weaknesses pertain to not only the individual traits of people, but also, to the extrinsic enabling factors like social support, as we just discussed, and
Right.
the attitude towards change. Are we conscious of the changing and emerging risks, or are we saying that climate change is a myth, that it's not real? So our ability to learn from the past, and I think the planning, the strategy for future, they are very important in this regard. So yeah, this is it.
Thank you so much, Saran. This was a really very informative session. I think I have personally learned a lot. And yeah, I'll probably now look up more stuff on disaster management, more research also to understand it in a deeper context. So thank you so much for coming,
Thank you, Ananya.
and thank you all.
Thank you, Ananya. Your questions have been really tough, actually, and I'm very, very happy about it. Also, just one point: since we could not take any questions here because of the time limit, all those who could join, they can definitely and kindly drop their questions or discussions
Absolutely.
in my inbox or yours, or
Yes,
Manushala's, I think.
Shala's inbox, or yes, please reach out for further conversation. Let's carry on the dialogue further.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
spread awareness.
Definitely.
And thank
Thank
you all
you.
for joining.
Thank you once again, Ananya, and also thank you, the organizer Manoshala, for this topic and the discussion. Because, honestly, the interface of disaster recovery and mental health and mindfulness, especially, has very very long room to go in research,
Yeah.
specifically from the perspective of social sciences. And this
Yes.
this conversation, I hope it adds to this beginning.
Yes. I hope it does create some dialogue, some start. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you, Saran, for coming. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
It was a pleasure having you here. Take
Thank you, Ananya.
care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.